Hey Victor, can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
I can. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. How's your morning going?
Good, very good. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This is Fringe Legal Edge. If you're joining us for the very first time, this is a show where I speak with leaders and experts around all things that will give your practice an edge. And today's topic will be extremely topical for, I would think, almost everyone who is working with any sort of technology. So Victor Tamayo is part of the sales engineering team at Latera. He's an exceptional person because he has the ability of juggling many projects at the same time. He works with firms of all sizes, all the way from 5 to 10 attorneys through to hundreds of attorneys or lawyers for anyone international. And yeah, I wanted to dig into a whole bunch of those things. But Victor, first, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Really excited to be on the show here today, and hopefully I can do some justice to. I know my colleague Vincent has been on. Hopefully I can follow him pretty well here.
We'll try and shy away from having discussions about Microsoft with you. I'll limit that to just Vincent. No, and so really part of the thing that ignited the idea of this conversation was, as I've been speaking to, frankly, law firms, legal ops teams, corporates, anyone that's working with technology projects within within the legal profession, otherwise, everyone has been overwhelmed because they tend to fall in one of two buckets. Either they are trying to do a lot, but they are resource constrained, especially with what is going on in the world with furloughs and all sorts of other things. They are frankly short of resources, or they are trying to spin something up pretty quickly to be reactive in the marketplace. And that creates a degree of complexity, that creates a degree of uncertainty for them in how to manage this. So I thought what we could do today, if you're open to it, is have a discussion around the life cycle of basically technology project management. So we can talk about getting started. So how do you actually prioritize which projects to focus on? I know you have plenty of experience there in helping people sort of identify how can you make multiple things work together. We can go through the doing phase of it. So actually, great, you selected something, you're now trialing it, implementing it, discussing it. How do you actually get engagement? And then lastly, I do want to touch on, if you have time, on some adoption techniques and actually closing things out. So how do you actually get the information, the data to make a decision? And then what do you do next?
Yeah,
Sound good?
sounds fun to me. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, let's start with starting off a project. So the scenario I've come across most frequently is, like, we have 20 things that we want to do in our short-term plan, right? So let's think of 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months. We don't know where this specific project falls because there are competing stakeholders, there are competing priorities, there are unknowns about the benefits. So in your experience as you worked with firms, how do you work through that? What are some of the things that you've seen that worked really well?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is just knowing what the projects are. I've run into situations where somebody wants to start a new project, they start planning for it, but they don't realize that there's another project on the horizon, or that there's something that they haven't accounted for. And you can have the plan for that first project down perfectly until you get a little bit of a curveball where now we need resources there, now we need individuals here. So I think one of the most successful things I've seen for managing and prioritizing these projects has been something as simple as a project matrix. So what do we have that we want to take a look at? What are some of the dates behind that? And I know one of the big things we stress are having those milestones. When you have projects that you're undertaking, it can be really easy, from my experience, to kind of feel as if you're not moving. You're just going, you're doing the same thing day in and day out. And if you establish clear milestones, I feel like that's something where everyone feels a little bit more energetic around it, because we can say, today is Friday, we just hit this milestone.
Right.
Now we know that we've moved past this, and we can focus our attention on next week and whatever that milestone might be there. So I think if you are trying to prioritize, manage your projects, one of the best practices I've seen is get it down on paper, get it down on Microsoft Word,
Right.
put it there so you can see it, you can visualize it, and then you can say, we want to do this, but we also have this that might conflict with it. Let's date it. Let's plan dates and milestones now.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't need to be complex, and it doesn't need to be something that
No.
needs to win any awards for design. It's just essentially a table, right, where you're putting
Hmm.
the uh, the objective and the target date, and then who owns it and what needs to happen next, that kind of stuff.
Yep, it's just putting it down somewhere where you can review it. Doesn't need to be, like you said, super. It doesn't need to be one of your images for the podcast episodes that you do there. Just something where we can refer to it.
Yeah.
If you and I are working on the project together, we know that it's down, it's been agreed upon. Just really keep it simple, but it keeps everyone on track at the end of the day.
Yep. I mean, it's obviously the basics of project management, but it's also probably one of the things that is often the least done because it seems so easy and so obvious.
Hmm.
And people, especially if you're intimately involved in the project, you will have all of this information in your head, but that creates issues because then you will certainly have some blind spots that you want to identify. And frankly, the only way to do that is if you start writing things down, you will likely come across, oh, I do need to do this. And it also allows there to be transparency between both,
Yep.
you and the other party as well. Have you noticed, and when we talk about these sort of project matrix, project milestones, when is that something that is a discussion that should be had before you've even begun the project, or is that sort of when you're kicking off the project? What's the right time to sort of bring that kind of discussion up?
I think before anything gets kicked off, what I've seen being most successful is before we doing anything with this project, let's get this milestones, let's get the matrix in place. So you made a great point there. There are blind spots where if it's your first time implementing something, if it's your first experience with it, you might not even realize that there might be something that might come up. So building in that at the very beginning. And I think the other important thing is being realistic, making sure that you have time in there if something does come up that you weren't expecting, and you can go back and you can work through it there. I think, what I've seen is people get excited. It's like, here's a new tool. The stakeholders are excited about it. The firm is excited about it, and they just want to jump right into it. And then that excitement can sometimes create even more of those blind spots. So definitely would say at the very beginning, before anything starts, put it on paper, put it in a Word document so that you can go back to it down the road.
Yep. No, and I think it's a fine line to balance, right? You don't want to lose the excitement and the eagerness to
Hmm.
get started, but spending it doesn't need to be a complex thing. A couple of emails here and there, and a 30-minute conversation often does the part. Going through that just means that the excitement is better rewarded at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a milestone, let's say, and what about actually managing the projects itself? So let's say uh, I'm going to become a very typical law firm. I'm going through some sort of a DMS upgrade, and I want to look at another technology, right? Whatever it might be. So something that Latera does, let's say, a comparison or transaction management. How do I balance the needs of the different stakeholders? So the lawyers may want to do X, the IT team has certain priorities because frankly they need to upgrade the DMS, a critical system,
Hmm.
by a certain date too. And the IT team will be involved in the other project too. So how do you manage the priorities of both of them, the potential conflict that might be?
I think one of the most successful things that I've done and I've seen and been a part of for that is getting people involved, making sure that if the stakeholders are excited about something, then let's see if one, two of you are willing to really be some of the project owners behind this, to where you can handle some of the pieces that maybe IT might be more tied up with in terms of those critical system updates. And with that, making sure that you don't pick what, if you have the ability to here, put everything on one person's plate, because things will come up, other projects will come into play, and then that project can stall because there's only one person that had an idea as to what was going on. I've been part of a couple of pro kind of, you hit it on the nail there. Somebody was looking at bringing in some new technology, but they were also updating their DMS system. What we were able to do is we got a group of about 6 people, different people with different roles, but we were all talking to one another. So
Right.
if something was going on with the DMS upgrade, we on the other side were aware of it, and we knew what was going on there. So when it comes to managing different projects, potentially competing projects, I think really making sure that we, to quote Jodie Cosgrove here, you know who's who in the zoo, and that everyone has distinct responsibilities, and no one feels as if everything is going to fall on them. And if they can't do it, that the project will stall.
Yep. No, I really like that idea, and I think one of the things you'd mentioned to me when we had a chat about this ahead of the session was understanding the dependencies, right? So it's important because sometimes people will, unless you know the full breadth and the scope of everything, you will assume that in order to implement X, you need to have Y in place. And oftentimes that's not the case. So if you are thinking about something that's involved on the desktop, does that include a SaaS solution on the web? If you are, and it doesn't of course apply to just technology, if you are thinking about doing training for something else, do people need to know the everything else? Do they need to have everything else in place, or can you do it more incrementally?
Yep, and I also think on the other side there, that's a way for you and your team to get quick wins. If you're able to identify that implementing this will make this easier, or make this, or these two will play with one another very nicely, to where it's two projects, but we're going to see the results of more than just those two projects individually. I think that's something else where if you do have multiple projects, it's important to be able to identify where they might overlap and potentially benefit one another, to where, hey, we will get this out of the way, but because we did this next project or this project at the same time is going to give you even more benefits. And I think that's something else really important before anything starts is anything that we're doing here going to build on top of itself? And if so, that's a way where, to your point earlier, keeping that excitement going, this is a project, but look at what we're going to get to on the other side of the tunnel.
Yep. No, perfect. And that's a great segue. So we're talking about excitement, people getting super enthused about wanting to try whatever it is today. We've got a milestone in place. We've got a plan in place and what we want to do. We are on track. Excellent. Good start. How do you make sure that the engagement is there? So projects, whether it's a pilot or a full implementation, fall flat for two reasons. There is a lack of enthusiasm, or the enthusiasm, goes the wrong direction, so super high to super low, or there are issues with implementation, right? Those are the two most common reasons why any project and technology related fails. So, and especially if you're doing a pilot, if you're testing out a potential system for the future, how do you ensure that does not happen?
Yep. So in terms of keeping that enthusiasm high, there's one project that I did at the beginning of this year, with someone who is now one of my favorite clients, based out of New York, where she was really excelled at handling both of those sides at the same time. So she was very in tune with her end users, and that was something that she told us at the very onset: is I am their advocate. And as this evaluation was moving forward, everything we did was with the end user in mind. And that is something where, in my opinion, if you are actually out there talking to them, listening to them, finding out what gets them excited, it's going to be easier for you to be able to keep that enthusiasm high. You made a point of, the enthusiasm is either very high or very low. What I've seen when it gets low is it's one person that's really pushing it, but no one else feels heard. So they feel as if this is all being done for one individual or a group. And if you want to keep that enthusiasm high, get your end users involved, get the people that this is going to benefit. Listen to them, hear what they want, hear what is causing them issues, and then address that as it goes. And the other piece there in terms of the implementation process, this is same client, we had calls very early in the morning where, something would come up. And the important thing there is to just identify it, figure out who needs to be brought into play. Is this something where perhaps we need to bring in a different resource who has more experience with this issue that we're facing? Really putting it all out there on the table. It's to make a baseball analogy there, perhaps someone is better fitted for a 2-inning outing as opposed to going the entire game. But those 2 innings that they pitch, they're going to be amazing, and they won't be involved in the entire game. But when you bring them in, they might save the game for you there. So I think it's realizing, if we are facing implementation hurdles, who who is the person that needs to be involved here, and then continually digging at it. It's technology. I think everything from Ring Central to something as complex as bringing in an entire new DMS system. Everyone's environment is a little bit different. There might be unknowns, and just keeping the morale high and continuously working through those issues instead of it's not working. What do I do now? I think that's the other thing is keeping the enthusiasm for the end users high. But as you're implementing, remembering we're going to fix whatever is wrong here, and we're going to get a great result as a result.
Yeah, and I think it's so, you said something earlier, right at the beginning, which is just critical to this all, as everything that you do has to be with the end user in mind. Getting them involved early, as you said, is so important. I know one of the projects, and probably multiple projects you worked on, right? There's a big focus on identifying those that would become champions, those that may be sponsors for the project. Help me understand, how do you actually identify those individuals? Are they just the ones that were making the most noise to begin with, that wanted this? And what's the role? What role do they play in this process, and how do you coach them, especially to involve other end users later down the line too?
Yeah, I think it comes back to listening. I think every champion I've worked with has become a champion for a different reason. I've worked with last year. I worked with a firm where one of the important things for the champion that we worked with was being able to have dinner with his family at night. We were having our initial conversations, and what he was telling us was he would leave the office, he'd have 2 hours with his family, but then he'd have to go right back to work. And what was a benefit for him was using this, I'm going to be able to get everything done earlier and not have to take a break from work to put my kid to sleep, but instead I'll be able to focus on putting my kid to sleep there. So that was one of those reasons that that developed a champion there. And that just happened from us sitting down pre-COVID, when you could be in a conference room with someone else, and asking him, what do you need? What drew you to this suite here? So it's listening to individuals. It could be something like that. I know one of our old colleagues here was very insistent that everyone always has an eye out for what's going to do for me. I think the other thing there is you can find a champion because they want to be the person that brought something to the firm, and they want to be known as that cutting edge, that thought leader of, I brought something in, I put my neck out for it, I exposed this to everyone else, and as a result, this is something that now benefits the entire firm. Always goes back to a story I heard from an IT director where he told us that he got a thank you letter from his lawyers for rolling out a technology to them. And he joked, anytime breaks, I'm the issue. This was one of the few times where I got praise for bringing something in.
And it's so important there to just build that trust, both in the example that you shared, where the individual is wanting to make time for his family to put his kids to bed, because they're required. People will often just say things like that, but to actually sincerely just say, look, this is something that I want to resolve in my life, that's important to me. Can you help me with this? And if you can, then that person will be your biggest fan, and will evangelize the technology for you, right? And the second thing, especially from, as you talked about, people wanting to put their neck out, it is a trust thing, right? If someone is doing that, then they want to make sure that they feel that it's the right thing for them to do, that it's the right solution for their problem, but also that the team that they're working with is one that's going to carry them forward. That's there, as you said earlier on when we talked about implementation, that look, things will go wrong, but we'll fix it, we'll get through it, we'll get past that, and it'll be okay.
Yep. And I think kind of in my role, that's one of in my opinion, the best part of my job is I need to be able to gain someone's trust so that they're able to say, as this project goes through, I know that I have an advocate in Victor who will go back, work with his team there. And that's also something where if you're putting your trust in someone else, it's because they listen to you. And circling back to some clients that I've had, there is, there are times where we're going to have 2, 3 calls to work through an issue there, but making sure that you're responsive, that they feel as if they're important to you, which kind of, that's one of the things that I always take in with, stealing a line from Will Carter here, is when I have those meetings with people, for me, I want to make sure that they leave that meeting feeling good about things, that they feel as if maybe we didn't resolve the issue, but there are clear next steps to get to the resolution there. So that is where that trust comes into play there, especially if shelfware is such a taboo term in legal tech there. Nobody wants to be the person that introduces shelfware, making sure that we're aware of that. And this will be a project that will have your name on it and that people will be benefiting throughout the firm, throughout the team there. And it all goes back to building that trust at the very onset.
Yep. No, great points. It's hard for me to argue against any of those. And so one of the things that absolutely drives me insane, so would love to hear your thoughts on it, whether I'm the only one or if this is a common thing, is there's often, and especially, I mean, this seems to be quite common in professional service environments, law firms being high on that list, where there's often a reluctance to try something. Instead, the focus is on, look, let's get a committee together, we'll evaluate this, we'll put out RFPs, we'll go through, 200 rounds. And the reason it drives me insane is I understand the business reasons to do this. Of course, you have to make a sound business decision. Of course, there needs to be a need for it. Of course, there has to be some value that whatever you're thinking about is bringing to the table. But there is a line at which the cost of investigating a technology far outweighs the actual cost of implementing or purchasing or procuring the technology. What are some ways, and this is a good question, what are some ways that that time frame can be contracted? So you're not going through 200 rounds, maybe you only go through 10 rounds or 20 rounds.
I think 2 things that come to mind there is, one, having the right people in place. Some of the most successful projects I've worked through are where there was still that due diligence, as there always will need to be, but the individuals that on the firm side were part of those committees, it wasn't their first rodeo. They'd been through a few different times. They'd built their own best practices in terms of how they want to handle it. And that's where you also need to trust. There's that trust again, the other side. Right. Trusting that they've also done this, that they've been through this themselves, and working together to combine your best practices, but being honest about what maybe won't work at your firm that they have seen as best practices, because every firm is different. They're different personalities, different structures, but being able to say, this worked really well in this project, and then they might say, well, this is something that I've seen work really well. And it's, again, circling back to that synergistic effect of 2 different ideas coming together and producing something even better. So that's one of those pieces there, in terms of making sure that you have the right people involved and that you're listening to both sides there. And I think the other piece that is really crucial there is being realistic about how much information is out there. How it's, you could spend an entire year running down every potential use case at your firm.
Right.
But that's a year where that solution could have been implemented, and those use cases could have been discovered in person, and people could have said, I never thought of this, but now I can do it this way. So I think having the right people kind of spearheading that, not just having people that are going through the rounds, let's say, and then being realistic about how much information you can gather, and having the trust that something new down the road is going to be tackled by both sides of the house there.
Nice. Yeah. Being conscious of time. So, two last things I wanted to cover. The first one is, how do you work on, we talked a little bit about sort of training and adoption. How do you gather the information? Because of course there's a purpose to doing all of these things, which is to measure the effectiveness. Talk to me about that, right? And it could be surveys, it could be anything else really.
Yeah, I think surveys is a big one. I know my team really leans pretty heavily on Microsoft Forms, where you're able to create a survey, you're able to get it out to the users, and you have that concrete evidence that you can look back on and say, hey, this is what we heard here. And I think the other big piece to that is knowing your end users. Again, there, making sure, hey, the people that I'm training here react really well to that classroom setting where they're willing to give us that half hour,
Right.
sit in a classroom, go through a sandbox activity. Or maybe I'm trying to introduce this to someone who doesn't have that level of attention
Mm.
span, doesn't want to. That's where you need to be able to find ways to deliver content to them via 5-minute videos, via quick reference guides. So I think that's the key thing, is making sure that you know your users, you know how they best learn. And that goes back to realizing that every firm is different. I've had firms where they've completely picked up technology
Mm.
through being sent 30-second clips of that technology every day where they learn something new. Other firms have requested classroom settings with their own documents, with their own work. So the adoption is one size does not fit all. You need to realize what type of end users you have and how you can best deliver content, because you could have the best adoption program in the world, but if it doesn't fit the way that your users learn things, it's not going to produce the results that you want.
And the last question, this actually came from one of the readers for the newsletter, which was specifically around, you know, because much of what we talk about actually is framed in the realm of the large law or the large enterprises. Um, how did some of these things scale down when, or differ completely when you're thinking about the solos or the small, or the smaller size of the market, and it could be anywhere from, let's say, 1 to 50 user firms.
I think with that, technology can really level the playing field. I know I'm speaking to a firm right now where it's a two-person firm. They both came from Big Law, but right now they're evaluating a solution where one of the first things they said is, this is something where I feel like I can go and punch at the same way as some of those larger firms I used to work at. So I think when it comes to
Sorry,
those,
my question was more specifically around the implementation and the project management part of things. I think, yeah, the technology point,
yep,
yeah, I don't disagree with you, but yeah, how does that work? Because there'll be more resource constraints sometimes.
yep, I think in that point it's offering help on from both sides there. So maybe the firm is more resource constraint, and that's where whoever is working with the firm there is, maybe they don't have the resources to offer, but they have the collateral, they have the quick videos there. So I think when it comes to implementing at a 1 to 50 lawyer firm, it's understanding the constraints in terms of their resources and then supplementing it with collateral, with help from that side there. So I think with that type of size firm, it's what can you do? What can you realistically do? I think the point made earlier is being realistic about this stuff. And then where can we fill in the space? Where can we provide you with what you need to get to the end there? So it's understanding what those possible resource constraints are, and then providing them with what they need to fill in the gap.
Perfect. And yeah, I guess one of the takeaways for me, at least from there, is if they are resource constrained and there's only so much that your human resources as a technology company might also be constrained to. So give them solutions that are more scalable. So the things that you talked about, the collaterals, because then, especially as they grow, if that's one of their intents, that can scale with them, right? You can
Yeah,
just give collateral to even more people, or you can create your own. Awesome. Victor, thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful weekend. And for everyone else, if you want to find Victor, he's on LinkedIn. Find a link to this episode. It will have his information on there, so you can connect with him there. And have a wonderful weekend.
my pleasure. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.